What if I told you that everything you thought you knew about Meghan Markle might only be the surface? What if behind the headlines, the tabloids, and the staged royal appearances, there were secrets so shocking, so deeply personal, that only a select few had ever seen them, and even fewer dared to speak out? Imagine a world where intelligence agencies monitor not just political figures, but someone like Meghan, carefully documenting moments of her life that should have remained private. And now, the woman at the center of one of the most controversial and talked about trials in recent memory, Ghislaine Maxwell, is claiming she knows exactly what they saw, what they recorded, and why it matters. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. It's difficult to overstate how explosive this could be. Ghislaine Maxwell is not just any whistleblower. She is a woman who moved through circles of immense power, whose life intersected with royalty, intelligence agencies, and elites whose influence shapes entire nations. For years, she has been labeled as manipulative, dangerous, even criminal. But what if, amidst all that controversy, she holds information so significant that it could force the world to look at Meghan Markle in a way it never has before? And what if this information involves not just career scandals, but something deeply personal, something so private it shakes the very foundations of public perception? Most people know Meghan Markle as a former actress, a woman who captured the imagination of millions with her Hollywood charm and, later, her role in the British royal family. They know the headlines. The engagement, the fairy tale wedding, the controversies, the interviews, and the unprecedented steps she and Prince Harry took to redefine their lives outside the monarchy. But beyond all that glamour, all that media attention, there lies a narrative carefully hidden, closely monitored by forces most of us could only speculate about. And according to Ghislaine Maxwell, MI5, the United Kingdom's domestic intelligence service, may have known far more about Meghan than anyone realized. Files, reports, surveillance logs, and private assessments, she claims, all existed. And they weren't about politics. They weren't about global threats. They were about Meghan herself. One of the most shocking claims she has made concerns Meghan's health, a topic so sensitive it could never have appeared in mainstream press. Maxwell alleges that Meghan underwent a hysterectomy at the age of 21. Think about that for a moment. 21 years old. A young woman just starting to navigate life, career, and personal identity, making a choice, or being subjected to circumstances that would leave a permanent mark on her body. For most of the world, this fact has been entirely unknown, obscured beneath the polished images of a Hollywood starlet and later, a royal figure. And yet, Maxwell suggests that MI5 knew. They had files. They were aware of this medical procedure long before anyone else. Why would an intelligence agency care about such a personal and private matter? What could possibly justify monitoring the intimate medical history of a young woman? And more importantly, what did they do with this information? Consider for a moment the broader implications. In today's age of privacy breaches, public scrutiny, and global media saturation, the idea that intelligence agencies are watching, documenting, and potentially weaponizing personal information isn't entirely new. But when that personal information involves a royal family member or someone about to join it, the stakes rise exponentially. And this isn't just a story of curiosity. It's a story about control, influence, secrecy, and the lengths to which powerful institutions will go to protect themselves. Every revelation Maxwell has hinted at carries emotional weight, legal implications, and societal shockwaves. And while the world has been distracted by interviews, streaming series, and tabloids, the real story, the one Maxwell claims to hold, has remained hidden, quietly simmering in the background, waiting to explode. You might be wondering, why is this relevant now? Why should anyone care about files that MI5 allegedly kept, or a private medical procedure that happened over a decade ago? The answer lies not just in the events themselves, but in timing. Maxwell's testimony, her interviews, and her public statements are resurfacing at a moment when the royal family is under more scrutiny than ever. Meghan and Harry have redefined what it means to be royals in the modern era, challenging centuries of tradition, hierarchy, and media control. Every claim, every revelation, every hint of surveillance suddenly becomes more than gossip. It becomes a lens through which the world can examine power structures, secrecy, and the human cost of belonging to one of the most scrutinized families on the planet. And yet, the public reaction is only scratching the surface. Some will dismiss Maxwell's statements outright, calling them manipulative or self-serving. Others will cling to them as undeniable truths that finally explain years of inconsistencies, rumors, and contradictions surrounding Meghan's life. But what if the reality is somewhere in between? What if Maxwell's insider perspective offers a glimpse into a world most of us will never fully understand, where morality, influence, and personal privacy collide in ways that are almost impossible to reconcile? That is precisely why this story matters, and why it is more explosive than almost anything else in the ongoing saga of the British monarchy. The narrative doesn't stop at surveillance and secrets. Maxwell hints at connections, conversations, and events that suggest Meghan's life was being shaped by forces beyond her control. From the corridors of MI5 offices to the whispers within royal estates, from media manipulation to strategic silences, every layer of this story deepens the intrigue. And yet, for all the drama, one constant emerges. Maxwell's revelations force us to question everything. What do we really know about Meghan Markle? What do we know about how power operates? And perhaps most importantly, what secrets have been kept from us, and why? Before we dive further, consider this. Most stories about royals, intelligence agencies, or celebrity scandals are carefully curated. They are designed to titillate, entertain, or provoke public outrage. But rarely do they touch on the intimate realities of an individual's life, particularly when those realities intersect with institutions built on secrecy and influence. Maxwell claims her knowledge bridges that gap. She claims to hold insights into events, decisions, and private information that no tabloid, interview, or book has ever captured. And the implications are enormous, not just for Meghan Markle, but for the broader conversation about surveillance, privacy, and institutional power. And now, as we begin peeling back these layers, one question looms larger than any other. What exactly did MI5 know about Meghan Markle, and how did they acquire this knowledge? Were these files intended as protective measures, political tools, or something far more sinister? And how did Maxwell come to learn about them? These questions are not just rhetorical. They are the key to understanding a story that has been kept from the public eye for far too long. By the end of this video, you will have seen secrets that MI5 tried to bury, personal revelations about Meghan Markle that were never meant to be public, and insights from Ghislaine Maxwell that could completely reshape the narrative surrounding one of the most famous women in the world. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What kind of life gives a person access to the most powerful, secretive, and influential circles in the world? Ghislaine Maxwell's life. From the moment she was born into privilege, the daughter of Robert Maxwell, a media mogul whose empire spanned continents, she was surrounded by wealth, power, and secrets. But her story isn't just about fortune. It's about proximity to power, the allure of elite networks, and a talent for navigating corridors where very few are allowed. Understanding Ghislaine Maxwell is essential to understanding why what she claims about Meghan Markle and MI5 is so explosive. Without context, the weight of her revelations could be lost on us. Maxwell grew up in a world most people only see in movies. Manhattan penthouses, private schools, jet-set vacations, and introductions to royalty before most teenagers even learn how to drive. Her father, Robert Maxwell, was a towering figure, controversial yet magnetic, a man who could make deals with politicians, celebrities, and intelligence operatives alike. His death in 1991, under mysterious circumstances off his yacht, left a cloud of intrigue and suspicion over the family. Ghislaine inherited not only wealth, but also an intimate understanding of influence, how to move unseen, how to leverage relationships, and how to cultivate access where it mattered most. She wasn't content to sit in the background. Ghislaine carved out her own sphere, moving from a socialite to someone deeply enmeshed in the world of the ultra-elite. She cultivated friendships with figures who could shape governments, manipulate media narratives, and orchestrate connections that most could only dream of. In doing so, she became more than a companion to power. She became a participant in its exercise. And in that role, She witnessed secrets most of us could not even imagine. Her proximity to people like Jeffrey Epstein, the financier whose criminal activities shocked the world, placed her at the center of networks that intertwined with politics, finance, media, and even intelligence agencies. It's this very network that provides context to Maxwell's claims about Meghan Markle and MI5. These are not casual observations from an outsider. They are insider insights drawn from years of operating within circles that are normally invisible to the public. Many dismiss Maxwell as manipulative or untrustworthy, and in some contexts, they would be correct. She has a complicated history, filled with legal battles, allegations, and controversies that have defined her public persona. But to understand the magnitude of what she claims, we must separate the personal from the informational. She may have personal motivations, yes, but the access and knowledge she possessed are real, verifiable, and significant. She was in rooms where intelligence officers whispered to each other about royals, where documents were exchanged quietly under the table, and where private medical, personal, and professional details were discussed in ways the public never saw. It is in this context that her knowledge about Meghan Markle becomes meaningful. Maxwell claims she has information about MI5's awareness of Meghan's life, including deeply personal elements such as a medical procedure at the age of 21, a hysterectomy, that would ordinarily be outside the scope of any intelligence interest. Why, Maxwell asks, would an agency dedicate resources to monitor the intimate health of a young woman who was not yet a royal? She points to patterns, access points, and the overlapping networks between the royal household and the intelligence community, suggesting that Meghan's trajectory, from Hollywood to Windsor, was observed, documented, and assessed long before most of the public knew her name. Maxwell describes meetings with individuals who had connections to MI5, people who revealed information under the veil of confidentiality. She recounts seeing documents, memos, and reports that outlined Meghan's life in meticulous detail, from her public appearances to private matters that would seem irrelevant to the average observer. These documents, she claims, painted a picture of Meghan that was not just biographical. It was predictive, analytical, and in some ways, controlling. At this point, you might ask, why should any of this matter? Why does it matter that an intelligence agency might be aware of a celebrity's health history or career decisions? The answer lies in understanding the stakes. Intelligence services like MI5 are designed to protect national security, yes, but they also operate in realms where information is power, where influence is currency, and where personal details can become leverage. When a figure like Meghan Markle enters the public eye in a high-profile, high-risk position, as a member of the royal family, every action, every decision, and every secret becomes potentially significant. Maxwell's insight is particularly valuable because she can trace the flow of this information. She knows who had access, who passed it along, and how it might have been interpreted. She can explain why certain decisions, by the palace, by the media, or by Meghan herself, were influenced by unseen knowledge circulating in elite networks. This isn't speculation. It's an analysis rooted in observation, experience, and access. Maxwell's life has been a continuous observation post for the powerful. And now, she is connecting dots that the rest of the world can only glimpse. One of the most critical points she emphasizes is the blending of public and private scrutiny. Meghan Markle was not merely watched as a public figure. She was analyzed as a potential risk, both to the image of the monarchy and to broader political interests. Maxwell claims that MI5 maintained files that went beyond typical security concerns. They documented personal health, career choices, and relationships in ways that suggest a deeper strategic assessment. Imagine your private decisions being cataloged in a dossier for people with motives you can't see, motives that might affect your future without your knowledge. For Meghan, according to Maxwell, this was not hypothetical, it was reality. And it wasn't just passive observation. Maxwell hints at interventions, indirect or otherwise, that were influenced by intelligence awareness. The idea that an agency could quietly shape perceptions, influence media narratives, or anticipate moves before they happened is chilling, but she asserts that it happened. Every public step Meghan took may have been scrutinized, analyzed, and filed, creating a level of surveillance and strategic insight that goes beyond the typical celebrity story. Despite all this, Maxwell herself is a polarizing figure. Skeptics will immediately question her motives. Is she telling the truth, or is this part of a personal narrative to gain attention or leverage? Maxwell acknowledges the complexity of her position, but she insists that her insights are rooted in first-hand experience. She points to documents she has seen, statements she has heard, and the network of connections she navigated, emphasizing that her knowledge is not conjecture. It is insider information drawn from years within the spheres of influence that shape public perception and private reality alike. As the world begins to absorb the implications, one question looms large. If Maxwell's claims are accurate, what does that mean for Meghan Markle? It means that her life, her choices, and her health were never entirely private. It means that an intelligence agency may have had detailed records of events most people never knew occurred. It means that the story the public sees, the fairy tale, the interviews, the public persona, is only one layer of a much more complex narrative, one that Maxwell is now peeling back for the first time. And yet, even as she reveals these insights, Maxwell hints that there is more, much more, lurking beneath the surface. She teases connections between surveillance, media narratives, and the royal family's internal strategies that suggest a level of orchestration and influence few could imagine. What exactly does she know? How deep do these files go? And why did MI5 maintain such detailed records on a young woman before she became a global figure? By the end of this chapter, one thing becomes clear. Ghislaine Maxwell is not merely recounting stories. She is offering a window into a world few outsiders have seen, a world where personal privacy, institutional power, and public perception collide in ways that can be devastating for those under observation. And as we move to explore Meghan Markle's early life under this lens, one chilling realization sets in. What happened next in her story was not just coincidence. It was influenced, observed, and documented long before the public ever caught a glimpse. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Imagine living a life where, from the very beginning, every step you take is scrutinized, not by your friends, your teachers, or your community, but by invisible eyes in offices far away, watching, recording, analyzing, and filing every detail. This was, according to Ghislaine Maxwell, the reality for Meghan Markle long before she ever became a household name. Most people think of Meghan as the actress who captured hearts on screen, or as the royal who shook up centuries of tradition. Few realize that her life may have been observed, cataloged, and assessed by intelligence agencies years before either Hollywood or Buckingham Palace came into play. Meghan Markle was born into a world of dualities. Her mother, Doria Ragland, provided stability, compassion, and a grounding presence. Her father, Thomas Markle, brought fame, ambition, and, eventually, public controversy. Navigating this split world would have challenged anyone, but for Meghan, it came with an additional, largely invisible pressure. She was entering a sphere where her every move, relationship, and choice could carry consequences far beyond her immediate surroundings. Maxwell asserts that MI5, along with other intelligence connections, had files that documented aspects of Meghan's early life that were intensely personal. The notion that someone could track the coming-of-age experiences of a young woman might feel invasive, perhaps even absurd, but in Meghan's case, Maxwell claims it was standard operating procedure. From a young age, Meghan exhibited the traits that would later define her public persona: independence, intelligence, charm, and an ability to navigate both public and private worlds with grace. In school, she was known for her sharp mind and empathy, qualities that drew admiration from teachers and peers alike. But Maxwell hints that even in these formative years, her interactions, choices, and social connections were quietly noted, either by acquaintances with intelligence ties or by intermediaries feeding information up the chain. Why? Because someone had deemed her a figure worth monitoring, someone with potential to enter spheres of influence where her actions could affect public perception, political dynamics, and social hierarchies. It wasn't just Meghan's academic or social life that drew attention. Her early forays into the professional world, from modeling assignments to small acting gigs, were also tracked. Maxwell claims that MI5 maintained interest in her career trajectory, not as casual observers, but as analysts predicting how she might evolve into a public figure. Every audition, every media appearance, every professional choice could have been cataloged in reports designed to anticipate future developments. Even her lifestyle choices, who she socialized with, where she traveled, and the people she aligned herself with, may have been included in confidential files. To many, this sounds like something out of a spy thriller, but Maxwell stresses that these observations weren't idle. Intelligence agencies like MI5 don't expend resources without purpose. If Meghan was being watched, the files weren't just biographies. They were risk assessments, influence reports, and predictive analyses. Maxwell suggests that these documents contained a level of detail that would be shocking to anyone outside the intelligence community. Medical notes, relationship patterns, personal habits, and even opinions formed by people close to her. And then there's the more personal, more intimate side of the story. According to Maxwell, part of what MI5 knew, and what she later confirmed, was Meghan's medical history, including a hysterectomy at the age of 21. Think about the implications. This is not just a note in a folder. This is a private, deeply personal event in the life of a young woman. Why would this information be of interest to a domestic intelligence service? Maxwell hints that it may have had to do with future predictability, public image management, and the potential consequences of Meghan's health on her trajectory into global prominence. It's a chilling intersection of privacy and institutional control, a young woman's medical history observed by people whose motives and intentions were largely invisible to her. But the surveillance wasn't merely passive. Maxwell describes a network of observers who were actively interpreting, analyzing, and even potentially influencing Meghan's path. Every interview she gave, every public appearance she made, could have been subject to scrutiny, not simply for safety, but for strategy. Maxwell emphasizes that these weren't just isolated incidents. This was a pattern, a continuous observation process. Intelligence wasn't just watching Meghan. It was building a profile that could anticipate her decisions, her relationships, and her potential impact on the institutions she would later touch, including the British monarchy. Consider the timing. Meghan's life was intersecting with multiple spheres: Hollywood, social activism, and eventually, royalty. Each step increased the stakes. Maxwell suggests that as Meghan's visibility grew, so too did the intensity of the scrutiny. It wasn't that MI5 was acting maliciously. In their logic, they were preemptively assessing risk, influence, and control. But from the perspective of an individual, especially a young woman in her early 20s, the experience of being cataloged, monitored, and interpreted in such detail is profoundly invasive. It frames every personal choice, every private decision, in a context of external judgment and potential leverage. Maxwell also points to the contradictions in Meghan's public persona. How could someone so independent, so seemingly free in her choices, operate under the weight of invisible observation? The answer, she suggests, lies in the selective awareness of surveillance. Meghan may not have realized the extent of the monitoring. From the outside, it would appear that she had autonomy, making decisions as any young adult would. But behind the scenes, according to Maxwell, there were observers anticipating consequences, filing reports, and discussing implications in confidential offices far removed from Hollywood or Los Angeles coffee shops. The stakes of these revelations are not just personal. They are political, social, and cultural. Meghan's path into the royal family was unprecedented, not simply because of her nationality or career, but because of the challenge she posed to the traditional structures of the monarchy. If intelligence agencies had files on her before she even stepped onto the palace stage, it reframes the story of her marriage, her media scrutiny, and even her departure from royal life. Maxwell's insights suggest a continuity of observation and analysis that stretches back years, implying that much of what the public sees today may have been influenced by decisions and knowledge held long before Meghan became a global figure. At this point, the contradictions are stark. Meghan is a woman celebrated for independence, strength, and advocacy, but Maxwell paints a picture of someone whose life, even in its earliest stages, was under the microscope. The personal and the institutional collide in ways few could have imagined. A young woman navigating ordinary challenges while simultaneously being assessed for extraordinary consequences. And this is just the beginning. According to Maxwell, MI5's files weren't static. They evolved as Meghan's life evolved, reflecting not only past behaviors but potential futures, weaving a web of anticipation that might have shaped events in subtle, invisible ways. And yet, for all the surveillance, observation, and documentation, there remained an element of secrecy, of contradiction, and of human unpredictability. Meghan made choices that surprised the public, defied expectations, and challenged assumptions. Maxwell hints that even the most meticulously prepared files could not fully predict the trajectory she would take, nor the decisions that would ignite global fascination, controversy, and debate. By the end of this chapter, one reality becomes undeniable. Meghan Markle's early life was far from ordinary, not merely because of her talents or ambitions, but because it was under constant, unseen scrutiny. The life most of us perceive as spontaneous, glamorous, or free may have been, in part, mapped, analyzed, and interpreted long before she became a household name. And the next layer of this story, the revelation of her most private medical choice and how it intersected with these networks of observation, is where the stakes get truly personal. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Imagine being 21 years old, at the very beginning of adulthood, standing at the crossroads of your life, and having to make a decision that will forever change your body, your health, and your future. For most young women, the thought of a major medical procedure at that age is terrifying. Yet, according to Ghislaine Maxwell, Meghan Markle underwent a hysterectomy at just 21, a revelation that, if true, casts a deeply personal shadow over the public narrative of her life. But what makes this claim so explosive is not just the procedure itself. It is the alleged awareness and involvement of MI5, the United Kingdom's domestic intelligence service, in keeping meticulous records about it. A hysterectomy is far from a casual medical event. It is a serious surgical procedure with long-term implications, including the inability to carry children, hormonal changes, and potential emotional and physical complications. To have undergone this at 21 is remarkable on its own. To have intelligence agencies allegedly monitoring the circumstances surrounding it elevates the matter to something extraordinary. Maxwell asserts that MI5 had detailed files on Meghan's health, including private medical decisions such as this surgery, which would typically be considered strictly confidential. These were not idle notes. They were part of a broader pattern of surveillance, cataloging information that could influence her public image and her trajectory into elite social and political circles. Consider the emotional weight of this moment. For Meghan, this must have been an intensely private decision. One of the most intimate choices a woman can make. The courage, anxiety, and vulnerability involved are enormous. Yet, according to Maxwell, even at this deeply personal juncture, Meghan's life was not her own. Intelligence files recorded, analyzed, and interpreted her medical history as if it were a matter of national interest. Maxwell hints that this level of scrutiny was not about curiosity. It was about creating a comprehensive profile, understanding her choices, and, perhaps, preparing to influence or predict her future actions. The implications are staggering. A 21-year-old woman making a private medical choice and having that decision potentially factored into intelligence reports about her suitability, her risk profile, or her public image. Maxwell frames this as a chilling intersection of personal privacy and institutional power. Who would think that an agency like MI5 would concern itself with a young woman's reproductive health? Maxwell suggests that the stakes were enormous. Meghan was entering a trajectory that might eventually touch the royal family, and every detail of her life, even the most private, was cataloged for potential leverage, assessment, or influence. But the story goes deeper. Maxwell claims that these files did not exist in isolation. They were part of a web of observations that connected Meghan's personal health, her social interactions, her professional choices, and her media appearances. Each element was cross-referenced, analyzed, and interpreted to create a predictive model of her life. Think of it as a dossier not just on a young actress, but on a woman whose choices could have far-reaching social, political, and cultural consequences. A hysterectomy at 21, a deeply personal medical choice, became part of a narrative evaluated by unseen observers who had interests beyond the individual herself. Why does this matter now? In the public imagination, Meghan's story is often framed as a Hollywood to royalty fairy tale. Yet Maxwell's revelations suggest that what appears as a personal journey may have been observed and perhaps even subtly influenced by institutional interests. A medical procedure becomes more than a private health matter. It becomes a potential variable in a broader calculation about influence, image, and predictability. And the fact that Maxwell claims first-hand knowledge of MI5's awareness adds a layer of credibility and shock to these claims. Consider also the emotional dimension. The decision to have a hysterectomy at 21 carries personal ramifications that go far beyond physical health. It involves identity, autonomy, and the right to make choices free from external pressure. Maxwell implies that Meghan's autonomy may have been compromised, not overtly, but by the constant awareness that her life was being monitored, documented, and evaluated. Imagine the psychological weight of knowing that every personal choice could be observed and filed by powerful individuals, interpreted through the lens of strategy, risk, and potential influence. Yet the public has almost no awareness of this. For most, Meghan's early adulthood seems ordinary: college, career aspirations, relationships, and ambitions. But Maxwell paints a different picture, one of surveillance, oversight, and calculated observation. The hysterectomy is a symbol, a focal point that illustrates the intersection of personal agency and institutional scrutiny. It is a stark reminder that the life we perceive on the surface may be just a fraction of the reality experienced by those under close observation. Maxwell also hints at the broader implications of this revelation. If MI5 was aware of Meghan's medical procedure, it raises questions about privacy, consent, and the role of intelligence agencies in monitoring individuals who are not, at the time, public figures or political actors. Was this standard procedure for someone of her eventual status, or was Meghan singled out for reasons that are still unclear? Maxwell suggests it is the latter, pointing to patterns of surveillance that extend across her personal, professional, and social life. The files were not about protection. They were about profiling, analyzing, and understanding a young woman who might one day wield influence far beyond her years. And there's another dimension, one that Maxwell emphasizes with a sense of gravity: the secrecy surrounding this knowledge. No mainstream media reported on Meghan's hysterectomy. No official biography mentions it. For most of the world, this aspect of her life remained invisible, shielded from public scrutiny. Yet in the hands of intelligence operatives, and in Maxwell's account, it was anything but private. It was a piece of a larger puzzle, a detail observed and cataloged because someone deemed it significant. The personal stakes, the institutional scrutiny, and the broader cultural implications converge in a way that is almost cinematic, yet entirely real. Maxwell's account transforms what might otherwise be dismissed as personal gossip into a case study in power, surveillance, and privacy. It forces the audience to ask uncomfortable questions. How much of our private lives are truly private when institutions have access? What happens when personal health intersects with public influence? And, most importantly, how does this knowledge shape the trajectory of someone like Meghan Markle, who would soon become one of the most visible women in the world? By the end of this chapter, the full weight of the revelation settles in. A young woman making a deeply personal medical decision is observed, cataloged, and analyzed by a powerful intelligence agency. Maxwell's account suggests this is not an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern of monitoring and influence. The hysterectomy becomes emblematic of the collision between private life and public scrutiny, personal agency and institutional power. And as the story continues, the next layer. The involvement of MI5 in Meghan's transition from Hollywood to royalty, and how that surveillance shaped perceptions and events, is where the stakes escalate even further. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. To understand the scale of what Ghislaine Maxwell claims, you need to grasp the unique intersection of British intelligence and the royal family. MI5, officially the United Kingdom's domestic security service, is tasked with protecting the country from threats, terrorism, espionage, and subversion. But what happens when their mandate overlaps with the private lives of individuals who are neither politicians nor direct national threats, yet whose influence, real or perceived, could impact public perception, international relations, and the monarchy itself? According to Maxwell, Meghan Markle became one of those individuals years before her wedding at Windsor, and her life came under the analytical eye of one of the most secretive organizations in the world. Maxwell claims that MI5's involvement was not casual. This was not mere background research for public security purposes. It was a systematic collection of information, a profiling exercise, and, in some respects, a strategic assessment of how Meghan's presence might ripple through royal and national structures. Files reportedly contained personal health records, career decisions, social connections, and even behavioral analyses. Every detail, from her choice of friends to her travel habits, could have been interpreted as an indicator of risk, influence, or alignment with certain societal outcomes. The connection between MI5 and the royal family is rarely publicly discussed. The monarchy operates under immense public scrutiny, and security is always a top priority. However, Maxwell's revelations suggest that the intelligence apparatus doesn't only protect the royals from immediate threats, it also monitors individuals who might one day enter or influence the royal ecosystem. Meghan Markle, as a rising actress with a public persona, became part of that ecosystem once her relationship with Prince Harry began to gain attention. But Maxwell asserts that the files predated her formal connection to the royal family, meaning her life was scrutinized well before she became part of the institution itself. Why would MI5 be interested in a young woman like Meghan before she joined the royal fold? Maxwell's claim is chilling. It wasn't just about protection. It was about influence and foresight. The agency, according to her account, monitors trajectories of individuals who could intersect with national symbols, like the monarchy, not only for safety but for strategic reasons. Intelligence isn't simply reactive, it's predictive. And Meghan Markle, in her early 20s, already displayed the traits that would later place her in a position of immense visibility and impact. Maxwell further alleges that MI5's files on Meghan were meticulous, cross-referencing multiple facets of her life. Public appearances were noted alongside private communications, relationships, and even her health history, including the hysterectomy she underwent at 21. To the casual observer, this might seem like overreach. To Maxwell, however, it was part of a structured approach to monitoring someone whose future actions could influence the monarchy's image, the media narrative, and even international perceptions of British soft power. Historical context helps clarify this. MI5 has long been intertwined with the royal family, not just in providing security, but in managing the flow of information that reaches both the public and key stakeholders. Historically, intelligence services have monitored potential threats and influential figures alike, sometimes keeping files on individuals whose lives intersected with the monarchy, diplomacy, or the media. In this sense, Meghan Markle was not an anomaly. She was, according to Maxwell, part of a continuum of individuals whose lives were quietly analyzed to protect the institution of the monarchy and manage public perception. Maxwell claims that what makes Meghan's case unique is the depth and personal nature of the surveillance. While MI5 might traditionally observe behaviors that could present security risks, her files allegedly extended into intimate territory, tracking medical procedures, personal relationships, and career decisions. This level of observation, Maxwell suggests, is unprecedented for someone who was not yet formally a member of the royal family. She emphasizes that these files were not passive. They were actively maintained, updated, and analyzed by personnel who understood the stakes of her future role. But why would Maxwell know this? According to her account, her network, built over decades of high-level social, financial, and political connections, provided her access to insiders who shared information on surveillance protocols, intelligence reports, and dossiers related to Meghan Markle. Some of these connections were direct. Others were indirect, pieced together through conversations, documents, and observed behaviors within elite circles. What emerges from Maxwell's testimony is a portrait of MI5 not as a distant, faceless organization, but as an active participant in shaping knowledge and, indirectly, the trajectory of Meghan's life. The intersection of MI5's activities and Meghan's eventual entry into the royal family also raises questions about influence versus protection. Maxwell suggests that the files were not simply about ensuring safety. They contained analyses of public perception, predicted media responses, and potential challenges Meghan might pose to institutional norms. Every choice she made could theoretically be anticipated and interpreted by operatives working to protect the monarchy's stability and image. This is where the line between surveillance and influence becomes murky. Intelligence was not only observing. It was analyzing the potential consequences of her decisions for one of the world's most scrutinized institutions. Maxwell also emphasizes the secrecy surrounding this relationship. The files, the memos, the assessments, none of it reached the public. Yet, she claims, these documents were comprehensive enough to allow operatives to anticipate scenarios involving Meghan's career moves, personal choices, and eventual royal interactions. This hidden layer of observation suggests that the monarchy, with intelligence guidance, was prepared for her arrival in ways the public could never have imagined. It also underscores the personal stakes. Meghan's autonomy, choices, and privacy were being evaluated in a high-stakes institutional context, sometimes without her knowledge. The implications are profound. If MI5 was monitoring Meghan Markle in such depth, then her story, from Hollywood to Windsor, cannot be understood solely through the lens of celebrity or royal drama. It is also a story of surveillance, institutional foresight, and calculated observation. Maxwell's claims force us to question the very nature of privacy for individuals who intersect with high power. How much of Meghan's trajectory was organic? How much was observed, anticipated, and, in some cases, quietly influenced by those with access to sensitive information? By the end of this chapter, one undeniable truth emerges. The royal family and MI5 are not merely connected by protocol. They operate in an intertwined ecosystem where personal lives, public perception, and institutional stability intersect in ways that are largely invisible to outsiders. Meghan Markle's early life, her private medical decisions, and her career moves were not only of personal significance but of institutional interest, meticulously cataloged and assessed. Maxwell's account suggests that this was part of a broader strategy to anticipate outcomes and protect the monarchy, but it also raises serious ethical and personal questions about privacy, autonomy, and the reach of intelligence agencies. And as the story unfolds, the next chapter will reveal how Maxwell claims she obtained first-hand insight into these files, the meetings and connections that brought her into proximity with MI5 sources, and the shocking details about what exactly they knew. And why? But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What does it take to move from the periphery of power to the very center of it? For Ghislaine Maxwell, the answer was access, timing, and an uncanny ability to navigate elite networks. She was not merely a socialite or a wealthy heiress. She was someone who understood the hidden currents of influence, the people behind closed doors, and the information that could shift narratives before the public even knew a story existed. And it was through this web of connections that Maxwell claims she obtained first-hand knowledge of MI5's awareness of Meghan Markle, knowledge that would shock even those who consider themselves informed about the inner workings of British intelligence. According to Maxwell, the meetings that brought her insight into MI5's surveillance of Meghan Markle were not accidental. They occurred through intermediaries she had known for years, individuals with both institutional authority and personal connections to intelligence officers. Maxwell had spent decades cultivating these contacts, people who trusted her discretion and understood that information flowed in ways few outsiders could comprehend. It is this network that allegedly provided her with documents, memos, and verbal briefings regarding Meghan's life, including details so private they had never been intended for public release. The first meeting she recounts is chilling in its casual professionalism. It took place in a location Maxwell describes as neutral, neither an office nor a private residence, but somewhere in between, designed to convey security without drawing attention. The people she met were calm, measured, and meticulously observant. Maxwell emphasizes that they were not sharing information casually. Every word, gesture, and document conveyed authority and purpose. She was shown files, summaries, and dossiers that included records of Meghan Markle's early career, social circles, travel habits, and even personal health decisions. Among the documents, Maxwell claims, was confirmation of Meghan's hysterectomy at 21. A detail that, according to her, left her both shocked and deeply concerned about the intrusion into personal privacy. Maxwell describes the atmosphere of these meetings as tense, almost clinical. She was aware she was being trusted with sensitive information that could have implications for both individuals and institutions. Intelligence officers did not speak in gossip. They spoke in coded language, referencing files, protocols, and assessments. Maxwell had to parse the meaning behind every statement, connecting the dots between disparate pieces of information to understand the full scope of what they were revealing. One particularly striking element Maxwell recounts is the degree of foresight contained in the MI5 documents. The files were not merely retrospective, they were predictive. Analysts had created detailed assessments of Meghan's potential impact on the monarchy, media narratives, and public opinion. Her career choices, relationships, and even private medical decisions were interpreted through a lens of risk and opportunity. Maxwell suggests that MI5 viewed Meghan not only as a person to be protected, but as an individual whose life could be strategically managed, or at least anticipated, through intelligence insights. It is important to pause and consider the implications. Here was a young woman in her early 20s, living her life in what she believed was private, yet intelligence officers were cataloging details with predictive analysis in mind. Maxwell stresses that these meetings were not about casual curiosity. They were about control, understanding, and preparing for eventualities that could affect one of the world's most visible institutions, the British monarchy. The files were a mechanism for anticipating challenges, guiding perceptions, and, in some ways, exerting quiet influence over events yet to unfold. Maxwell also recounts the subtle ways in which the information was delivered. It wasn't a simple handover of files. It was a layered process of insight. Documents were accompanied by commentary, emphasizing the significance of certain events, the potential consequences of choices, and even the likely reactions of the public and media. In one striking anecdote, Maxwell recalls a discussion about how Meghan's health history, including the hysterectomy, could influence public perception if it ever became known. The intelligence officers framed it as a consideration of risk to institutional reputation, a stark reminder that personal privacy was secondary to the interests they represented. The meetings left Maxwell with a profound understanding of how intelligence and influence intersect. She realized that MI5's files on Meghan Markle were not isolated. They were part of a broader strategy involving observation, documentation, and predictive analysis. Every detail was interconnected, forming a mosaic of insight that extended from her early life in Hollywood to her eventual emergence on the global stage. Maxwell describes this realization as both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Awe at the scale and sophistication of the surveillance. Terrifying because of the personal implications for Meghan and the potential ethical consequences. Furthermore, Maxwell claims that these meetings highlighted a culture of discretion and secrecy that few outsiders could imagine. The individuals she met were acutely aware of the sensitivity of the information. They spoke in a manner that assumed she understood both the importance and the risk of what she was being told. Maxwell emphasizes that this was not casual sharing. It was a calculated, deliberate transfer of knowledge meant for someone who could comprehend and contextualize it. The experience also illuminated the paradox of observation and influence. MI5, according to Maxwell, was not merely documenting Meghan's life for security purposes. They were interpreting it, predicting outcomes, and potentially shaping narratives, all while maintaining the outward appearance of neutrality. This is where Maxwell's insight becomes particularly valuable. She bridges the gap between institutional observation and personal impact, showing how private decisions can be cataloged, analyzed, and even leveraged by powerful actors. Maxwell recounts one moment in particular that stayed with her. An intelligence officer, speaking quietly but firmly, referenced Meghan's future role and the potential implications of her early medical history on both perception and influence. The remark was indirect, almost coded, but the meaning was clear. Nothing in Meghan's life, however personal, was beyond the scope of strategic assessment. Maxwell describes feeling a mix of shock, disbelief, and unease. For her, this was a vivid demonstration of how deeply intelligence agencies can intersect with private lives, particularly when those lives are poised to intersect with power. By the end of these meetings, Maxwell had absorbed more than just facts. She had absorbed the reality of systemic observation. Meghan Markle's life, in Maxwell's account, was mapped, interpreted, and potentially influenced in ways that the public could never see. Every career decision, personal choice, and medical procedure was cataloged with purpose, forming a dossier that reflected both what had happened and what might happen. It was a level of insight that few people ever experience, and even fewer live to reveal. And as Maxwell processed the magnitude of what she had seen, she realized that the implications were enormous, not only for Meghan Markle, but for anyone who believes that private lives can remain private when they intersect with power. These meetings were more than intelligence briefings. They were revelations about the intersection of surveillance, influence, and personal agency. Maxwell understood that the story she had uncovered was not just about observation. It was about control, secrecy, and the extraordinary ways in which institutions can shape, anticipate, and respond to the lives of individuals who enter their sphere. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. If you thought you knew Meghan Markle, the actress, the activist, the royal, you've only seen the surface. According to Ghislaine Maxwell, the truth is far more intricate, far more controlled, and far more shocking than any headline, interview, or biography has revealed. By this point in Maxwell's narrative, we've seen surveillance, observation, and predictive dossiers. Now comes the stage where the revelations hit hard, where personal details and institutional oversight collide to expose a story few could have imagined. Maxwell asserts that MI5's files went far beyond standard surveillance. They weren't just keeping tabs on Meghan's public appearances or monitoring potential threats. They contained detailed accounts of her medical history, relationships, and psychological tendencies, all cross-referenced with her public behavior and predicted future decisions. The implication is staggering. A young woman in her 20s was not only under constant observation, but analyzed as a potential variable in the complex world of British royalty. Her life, in ways most of the public could never fathom, was being documented, interpreted, and assessed for impact on a global stage. One of the most explosive elements Maxwell highlights is the hysterectomy Meghan underwent at 21. While this is a deeply personal medical procedure, Maxwell suggests that MI5 treated it as a critical data point. It wasn't about curiosity. It was about understanding how such private decisions could intersect with public perception, influence, and, ultimately, institutional strategy. Maxwell claims that intelligence officers speculated on how this aspect of Meghan's medical history could be used to predict her emotional resilience, her decision-making, and even how the public might perceive her as a future royal. Think about that. Your most private health information potentially evaluated not for your well-being, but for the broader perception of a monarchy centuries old. But the revelations don't stop there. Maxwell describes insights into Meghan's relationships, friendships, and professional connections, all of which were cataloged in ways designed to anticipate challenges to the monarchy's image. The files, she says, mapped her social network with uncanny precision, noting allies, potential detractors, and influence pathways that could affect how she navigated both Hollywood and royal circles. This is not casual speculation. Maxwell portrays a detailed, calculated monitoring system that treated her life as a set of variables in a complex social and political equation. One of the most surprising aspects Maxwell emphasizes is the level of emotional and psychological analysis. Intelligence personnel, she claims, considered Meghan's personality traits, responses to stress, and decision-making patterns. Every interview, every public statement, and even her social media presence was scrutinized, cataloged, and interpreted. Maxwell contends that these insights were used to anticipate how she would react to palace pressures, media scrutiny, and public criticism. This is a level of attention most people reserve for national threats, not a young actress entering a relationship with a royal. Equally shocking are Maxwell's claims about attempts to influence perception subtly. According to her, MI5's assessments weren't passive. They suggested strategic interventions, shaping media narratives and anticipating challenges before they emerged. Every public appearance could have been influenced by unseen advice, internal briefings, or guidance rooted in intelligence insight. Maxwell frames this as a combination of observation, prediction, and indirect influence, a system designed to manage not only Meghan's safety, but her image and impact on the monarchy. Perhaps most disquieting is the personal intrusion. Maxwell repeatedly emphasizes that these revelations are not abstract. They include intimate details of Meghan's life, her health, her relationships, her emotional responses, that no ordinary observer should ever have access to. The files, according to Maxwell, treated her as both a subject of study and a potential risk to institutional stability, blending personal privacy with institutional prerogative in ways that raise profound ethical questions. Maxwell also touches on the contradictions in public perception. To the world, Meghan appeared independent, confident, and free to chart her own course. Yet, according to these files, every action was under scrutiny, evaluated for its impact, and interpreted in ways that could have influenced her trajectory. Maxwell suggests that the dichotomy between Meghan's public persona and the private monitoring she underwent explains many of the tensions observed in her royal life. The feeling of pressure, the public controversies, and the intense media focus. What the world perceived as choice or defiance may have been, in part, a response to the unseen weight of institutional oversight. And there are surprises that push the boundaries of what most would consider plausible. Maxwell hints at internal discussions within intelligence and royal circles about the implications of Meghan's medical history, her career trajectory, and her potential to influence public opinion. These were not hypothetical discussions. They were active deliberations, cataloged in files and briefed to decision-makers. Maxwell emphasizes that this knowledge adds context to events that have since unfolded, the interviews, the media narratives, and the public scrutiny she endured. Through all of this, Maxwell maintains that her perspective is rooted in first-hand insight. She stresses that she did not obtain these details through speculation or rumor, but through access to individuals and documents within the intelligence community. She portrays herself as a witness to the mechanisms that observed Meghan's life, cataloged her personal history, and evaluated her potential impact on one of the world's most visible institutions. The emotional resonance of these revelations cannot be overstated. They suggest that a young woman, navigating a life of increasing visibility, was never fully free from observation. Her most personal decisions, health-related, social, and professional, were analyzed for potential consequences far beyond her immediate sphere. Maxwell frames this not as a mere curiosity, but as a profound invasion of privacy, one that has shaped Meghan's experiences, decisions, and public narrative in ways the public has only glimpsed. By the end of this chapter, one reality becomes unavoidable. Meghan Markle's life, long perceived through the lens of celebrity and royalty, may have been guided, observed, and interpreted by intelligence agencies in ways that few could imagine. Maxwell's revelations challenge the simplicity of the public narrative, exposing a web of observation, analysis, and influence that intersects with every facet of her life. And as we move into the next chapter, the stakes rise even higher. Maxwell is about to reveal not only what MI5 knew, but also how this knowledge may have shaped the strategies, decisions, and controversies surrounding Meghan Markle, both before and after her entry into the royal family. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. When we think of intelligence agencies like MI5, most people imagine counterterrorism operations, cybersecurity threats, and political espionage. Rarely do we think of them observing a young woman in Hollywood, someone whose life seems distant from national security concerns. But according to Ghislaine Maxwell, that is precisely what happened with Meghan Markle. And it wasn't passive observation. The information collected, she claims, was used strategically, with every detail serving a purpose in a broader calculation about influence, public perception, and the monarchy itself. Maxwell explains that the files on Meghan were layered, combining medical history, social connections, career moves, and personality traits. This wasn't simply about knowing facts, it was about analyzing patterns. Intelligence officers could anticipate how Meghan might react under pressure, how she might respond to media scrutiny, and how her relationships could affect both Hollywood narratives and royal optics. In essence, MI5's strategic use of information transformed Meghan's life from a personal journey into a complex case study of influence and risk. Consider the hysterectomy she underwent at 21. To most, this is a private health matter. According to Maxwell, MI5 treated it as a data point with implications for her emotional resilience, public image, and even her potential to navigate the intense pressures of royal life. The strategic calculation was chilling. Knowing that Meghan could face scrutiny about fertility, motherhood, and personal choice, intelligence operatives could predict how media coverage, palace narratives, or public perception might shift. Maxwell emphasizes that this is not speculative. It's based on documents she claims to have seen, showing explicit references to the relevance of her medical history in intelligence assessments. But the strategic use of information extended far beyond health. Maxwell describes files detailing Meghan's social circles, her friendships, and her professional relationships. Every interaction was analyzed for potential consequences: allies who could support her, detractors who could undermine her, and connections that might either strengthen or destabilize her influence.